Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into a really important topic about how we connect with each other, especially focusing on something called the dismissive avoidant attachment style. We'll be using insights from Mindy Rivers' book, Understanding the Dismissive Avoidant Attachment Style, to help us break down some complex ideas into easy-to-understand language. Theodore, I'm glad you're here to help us explore this.
Thanks, Miles. I'm happy to. This style of attachment can be pretty confusing for people, both for those who have it and for their partners. It often looks like someone just doesn't care, but it's much more complicated than that.
Right. One of the first things the book talks about is why emotions can feel really unsafe for a dismissive avoidant person, even when they're with kind people. This sounds like a contradiction. If someone is being kind, why would emotions feel unsafe?
It's a great question, and it's at the heart of understanding this. For most people, emotions like crying or asking for comfort are just ways to get closer. But for a dismissive avoidant, those same moments can feel like a lot of pressure, like they're being exposed or like a huge problem is starting that they can't fix.
So it's not about the current kind person, but about past experiences.
Exactly. Emotions feel unsafe when they weren't handled well early in life. Many people with this style grew up in homes where feelings weren't really welcomed. Maybe their feelings were ignored, minimized, made fun of, were treated like an inconvenience. If a child learned that being sad led to being pushed away or dismissed, then sadness starts to feel like a dead end. If fear led to criticism, fear becomes something to hide. If anger led to fights that never got fixed, anger starts to feel dangerous.
That makes sense. It's like learning that certain emotions lead to bad outcomes, so you stop showing them. But does that mean they don't have emotions?
Not at all. They often have very deep emotions. The problem is that these feelings became linked to discomfort. Instead of feelings being a way to connect, they become a path to shame or feeling totally overwhelmed. When something feels that bad, you naturally try to avoid it, just like you'd pull your hand away from a hot stove.
So they're not cold, they're just protecting themselves because emotions feel dangerous. Can you give an example of how this might happen in childhood?
Certainly. Imagine a child who's upset and needs a hug or some comfort. Their caregiver might get annoyed or tell them to stop crying, or even just stay silent. The child learns from this that showing emotion changes the relationship in a painful way. They still feel the emotion, but they learn to hide it. This hiding becomes a habit, and habits become identity over time. Later as adults, they might say they're not very emotional, but what they really mean is they learned not to show.
That's a powerful connection. It's not a choice they're making as an adult, but a deeply ingrained response. You also mentioned emotions feeling unsafe because they represent a loss of control. How does that play out?
Many dismissive avoidants really value control because it's been their way of staying steady. If their childhood home was chaotic or shameful when emotions ran high, they learned to protect themselves by staying calm and rational. Intense emotions as an adult can feel like the opposite of rational, like a huge force that could drag them under. So they push these feelings away, maybe by shutting down, focusing only on logic, or just leaving the room.
I can see how that would lead to conflict in a relationship. If a partner is upset and showing strong feelings, the avoidant person might feel this intense urge to escape or even get irritated.
Precisely. That irritation isn't necessarily because they don't care, but because irritation creates distance, and distance brings back that sense of control they rely on. The partner might see this as being cold, while the avoidant person feels the partner's emotions as pressure. In reality, both are reacting based on their own past experiences. One wants connection, the other wants safety.
So it's a clash of different needs and past lessons. What about the fear of being judged?
That's another big one. Many dismissive avoidants grew up where their emotions were met with criticism. If they cried, they were told they were too sensitive. If they expressed fear, they were called weak. If they needed something, they were demanding. So they learn to connect showing emotion with being put down or humiliated. As an adult, even if their partner is kind, their body still expects that judgment to come.
That's why they might prefer to deal with things alone then? Because being seen while feeling is too risky?
Exactly. Alone time allows feelings to exist without being witnessed. Being witnessed can feel like evaluation. If your past taught you that people react badly to your feelings, then being seen while emotional feels dangerous. They might not even want comfort, they just want privacy. The difficulty comes when this need for privacy turns into isolation.
And it sounds like that privacy can actually prevent them from getting the understanding they might secretly need. What about emotions being linked to obligation?
Yes, this is a big one. Many dismissive avoidants learned that relationships come with expectations they couldn't meet. Maybe a parent relied too much on them emotionally, or they felt their needs were a burden, so they learned that emotions create demands. In adulthood, a partner's feelings can feel like a request that the avoidant person is somehow responsible for fixing. Even if the partner isn't asking for a fix, the avoidant person feels that heavy responsibility, which can feel like a trap, so they pull away to protect themselves from that feeling.
So if a partner says, "I feel lonely," the avoidant person doesn't hear a request for connection, but a huge task or even an accusation?
That's a very common reaction. They might feel their stomach drop or the urge to defend themselves, thinking, "I'm going to be blamed," or "I'm expected to provide something I just can't." That thought can cause panic, and panic often shows up as pulling away. The partner feels abandoned, and the avoidant person feels the conversation is a danger. Both experiences are painful, but they come from different places.
And there's also a part about emotions awakening longing. What does that mean?
This is a quiet truth many avoidants don't talk about. If you spent years avoiding your emotional needs, suddenly letting yourself feel longing can be very scary. It can feel like opening a door you can't close. Longing can feel endless, like you'll become completely dependent and lose your strength. So they keep longing far away, telling themselves they don't need much, focusing on being independent. The cost is that the heart doesn't disappear, it just becomes harder to access.
It seems counterintuitive. After a close moment, you'd think they'd feel more connected, but instead they might pull away?
Yes, a deeply tender moment can bring warmth and closeness, but then later they feel unsettled. That closeness woke up a part of them that wants more, and wanting more can feel unsafe, so they create distance to quiet the longing. They might even convince themselves the relationship is too much, or start focusing on their partner's faults. These actions reduce longing by reducing closeness, but they also cut off real connection.
And finally, emotions can feel unsafe simply because they haven't had practice with them. If you don't know how to name what you're feeling, it must be overwhelming when it finally bursts through.
Exactly. If emotions weren't named or discussed in childhood, they might not know what they're feeling until it's really strong. They miss the early warning signs. Then, when the emotion finally appears, it feels sudden and completely overwhelming. This makes emotions seem unpredictable. Unpredictability feels dangerous, so the avoidant person tries to keep emotions away because they feel like a storm that comes without warning.
So, how does someone begin to heal this? It sounds like such a deep-seated set of beliefs.
Well, the healing starts by realizing that the danger isn't always in the emotion itself. The danger is often the meaning you learn to attach to it. Sadness might have meant rejection. Fear might have meant humiliation. Need might have meant burden. If those meanings were learned, they can be unlearned. This doesn't happen by forcing yourself to be emotional. It happens by having new experiences where emotion is met with respect. It happens by allowing small feelings to be named and tolerated so they don't have to build into a storm.
Can you give us a small, practical example of what that healing might look like?
Sure. Imagine a dismissive, avoidant person feels irritation rising in a conversation and realizes irritation is often their shield. They pause and say they are feeling overwhelmed. They ask for a short break and promise to return. This is emotional honesty, but it is manageable. It doesn't require a dramatic confession. It simply names what is true and creates safety. Over time, moments like this teach the avoidant person that emotion can be shared without losing control or dignity.
That's a really concrete way to start. It sounds like the key is making emotions feel safer through small, steady steps. Now, let's move on to something related, the fear of vulnerability. For many people, vulnerability is hard, but it's often seen as a path to deeper connection. Why is it such a huge hurdle for someone with a dismissive avoidance style?
Vulnerability is letting someone see what really matters to you, especially the parts you can't control. It is admitting you are hurt, admitting you miss someone, admitting you are afraid, or admitting you need comfort. For many people, vulnerability is hard, but still possible. For a dismissive avoidant person, vulnerability can feel like stepping into danger, even when love is present. Understanding that fear is one of the most important steps toward changing avoidant patterns, because the fear often sits underneath withdrawal, defensiveness, and emotional distance.
So again, this fear goes back to childhood experiences.
Absolutely. If as a child you showed need and it was ignored, you learn that vulnerability leads to emptiness. If you showed need and it was criticized, you learn that vulnerability leads to shame. If you showed need and it made adults irritated, you learn that vulnerability burdens people. These lessons stick around. They become a quiet belief that being open will cost you something important.
And the fear of vulnerability also comes from the desire to maintain dignity, right? How does vulnerability threaten that? Many dismissive avoidant people carry a deep respect for strength. They may have built their entire life around being capable and handling pain privately, and they may feel proud of that. Vulnerability can feel like the opposite of that identity. It can feel like admitting weakness. Even if they want closeness, the fear of vulnerability can make closeness feel like a risk to self-respect. When a person feels that risk, they often choose distance, because distance protects dignity. So, if they're hurt by something a partner does, instead of saying, "that hurt me," they might just become distant or cold. Exactly. They might act cold, they might focus on the partner's flaws, they might convince themselves the relationship is not worth it. Underneath, they may be trying to avoid the vulnerability of saying, "that mattered to me." Saying it mattered reveals that the partner has power to hurt them. Many dismissive avoidant people fear that kind of power imbalance. They want to feel safe by feeling in control, and vulnerability can feel like giving up control. What about the fear of becoming too dependent if they're vulnerable?
Admitting you need someone means admitting you are attached. Attachment is beautiful, but for dismissive avoidant people, it can be linked to fear. They may associate attachment with being trapped, obligated, or overwhelmed. They may have learned early that relationships require them to shrink themselves, perform, or manage other people's moods. With that history, dependency doesn't feel comforting, it feels dangerous. Vulnerability is the doorway to dependency, so the doorway itself feels threatening.
So, if a partner asks, "tell me what you feel," they might panic or get irritated?
Yes, panic or irritation. The partner may be asking for connection, but the avoidant person may hear a demand. They worry that if they open up, they'll get pulled into an emotional process that never ends, or their words will be used against them, or it will lead to more expectations. These worries can make vulnerability feel like a trap.
And then there's the fear of being misunderstood. That must be a huge barrier, too.
If you grew up in a home where your feelings were dismissed or corrected, you may not trust that someone will understand you now. You may fear that if you share, the other person will respond in a way that makes you feel worse, like being told you're overreacting, or that your feeling is wrong, or that you're being selfish. Even if your partner has never done that, the fear can still exist because the body remembers the old experience. To avoid being misunderstood, the avoidant person may choose silence.
Like when a partner asks, "do you miss me?" and they tighten up?
Exactly. They might answer vaguely or change the subject. They may even respond with annoyance. The partner may feel rejected. The avoidant person may feel relief after the subject changes, because relief comes from avoiding vulnerability. Underneath, saying, "I miss you," isn't just words. It's an admission of need. It is an admission that the partner matters. If being attached has felt risky in the past, that admission can feel frightening.
What about when they've practiced emotional self-control for a long time? How does that affect vulnerability?
Many dismissive avoidants are very good at turning down their feelings. They focus on tasks, logic, and independence. So when they finally let themselves feel, the emotion can come out very strongly. This makes vulnerability feel overwhelming. They fear that if they open the door even a little, the feelings will rush out and they won't be able to manage them. So they keep the door shut, not because they don't want closeness, but because they fear losing control. And this can lead to a really difficult cycle in relationships, can it? It can. The avoidant person keeps feelings contained, becomes numb or irritable, and the relationship feels flat. The partner pushes for connection. The avoidant person feels more pressure and withdraws. This withdrawal increases loneliness for both people. The avoidant person might then end the relationship thinking they're not suited for intimacy. In reality, the relationship may have been strained by fear of vulnerability, not by lack of love.
It sounds like a tragic misunderstanding. How does perfectionism fit into this fear of vulnerability?
Some dismissive avoidants feel they must be absolutely certain before they speak. They fear saying the wrong thing. They fear being judged for not having the perfect emotional response. In a sense, they treat vulnerability as an exam, where if you don't have the right answer, you shouldn't answer at all. This is a painful standard because relationships need presence, not perfect words. If they grew up with criticism or high expectations, the fear of being wrong makes it very hard to speak from the heart.
So, how do you heal this deep fear of vulnerability?
Healing doesn't mean forcing yourself into deep emotional confessions. For many avoidant people, that approach backfires. Healing often begins with small, manageable honesty. You might share preference. You might admit you are tired. You might say you felt stressed during the conversation. You might tell your partner you care even if you are struggling to show it. These are small openings. They build trust because they show that you can be seen and still be safe. And setting boundaries is part of it too. Yes, it's crucial. Many avoidant people fear vulnerability because they fear being swallowed. Boundaries protect against being swallowed. You can share what you feel and still say what you can and cannot do. You could admit you are hurt and still ask for time. You can say you need reassurance and still respect your partner's needs. Vulnerability does not require losing yourself. In fact, the healthiest vulnerability often includes a clear sense of self. The goal is not to judge the fear, but to understand it and gently update it with safe experiences. Over time, vulnerability can feel less like danger and more like intimacy.
That's a powerful way to put it. Gently update it. Now, let's explore shame, which the book says plays a hidden role. How does shame show up, and why is it so hidden for dismissive avoidance?
Shame is one of the most misunderstood emotions because it often hides behind other feelings. It can look like irritation, sarcasm, or indifference. It can look like a sudden urge to withdraw, a sudden urge to change the subject, or a sudden urge to end a relationship. Shame is the feeling that something about you is unacceptable and that if it is seen, you will be judged or rejected. For many dismissive avoidant people, shame is not felt as a loud inner voice. It is felt as a quiet tightening that says, "Don't let anyone see this."
Where does this shame come from?
It often forms very early when a child's normal needs are treated as inconvenient. A child who cries isn't doing anything wrong, and a child who needs comfort isn't being dramatic. But in some homes, those ordinary needs are met with annoyance, ridicule, or dismissal. When this happens repeatedly, the child begins to associate their own vulnerability with disapproval. Over time, the child learns to feel ashamed of having needs at all. Hiding those needs becomes the safest way to cope.
So their calm, self-sufficient appearance might actually be a way to avoid shame.
Yes. Self-sufficiency can be a strength, but it can also be a way to avoid shame. If you never ask for comfort, you never risk being told you are too much. If you never admit you are hurt, you never risk being told you are weak. If you never show longing, you never risk being laughed at. The avoidant person learns, often without realizing it, that distance is a way to stay dignified. The dignity is real, and it is also protective.
So if they feel lonely in a relationship, they can't express that feeling?
No, because saying I feel lonely would reveal a need, and need can activate shame. Instead, they might become critical of their partner, saying they are too emotional, too demanding, or too intense. They might focus on flaws. This criticism creates distance, and distance reduces the risk of being seen. Underneath, the person may be longing for closeness, but shame blocks the direct path, so the person takes an indirect path that looks like withdrawal.
And shame can also form if emotions were mocked in their family.
Absolutely. A child who cries might be teased. A child who is sensitive might be called weak. A child who is affectionate might be told they are clingy. Even if these comments are framed as jokes, a child takes them seriously because the child depends on the caregiver's acceptance. The child learns to harden. They learn to hide tenderness. As an adult, they may feel a flush of shame when they get emotional, and they may shut it down instantly. They might not even know why they are shutting it down. They simply feel that it is unsafe to show emotion.
It seems like shame and indifference are often linked then.
They are. Indifference can be a shield that protects against the risk of wanting. If you admit you want someone, you might be rejected. If you pretend you do not care, you cannot be rejected in the same way. This is not always conscious. The person might genuinely convince themselves that the relationship is not that important. They might tell themselves they are better off alone. These thoughts can be a way of reducing the pain of vulnerability. Shame says, if you need, you are weak. Indifference says, I do not need.
And what about feeling emotionally incompetent? Does that come from shame too?
Yes, many dismissive avoidant adults feel confident in practical areas of life and then feel strangely inadequate in emotional areas. They may not know what to say when someone is upset. They may not know how to comfort. They may not know how to talk about feelings without feeling awkward. When their partner asks for emotional presence, the avoidant person may feel a wave of shame that says, I cannot do this. Instead of admitting that shame, they may withdraw or become defensive, because defensiveness is easier to tolerate than inadequacy.
So if a partner says, I need you to be there for me emotionally, it's not just a request, it triggers that deep shame.
It can make their stomach drop. They may respond with frustration, saying that they are doing their best or that the partner is never satisfied. The partner may feel dismissed. Underneath, the avoidant person may feel ashamed that they do not know how to meet the request. Shame creates a sense of being trapped. If you cannot do what is asked and you cannot admit you are struggling, withdrawal becomes the escape. And this shame can affect how they view love itself. Love is vulnerable. If you love someone, they matter. If they matter, they can hurt you. If you admit how much they matter, you are giving them access to your softer places. Shame can make that admission feel humiliating, especially if you are taught that you should not need anyone. So the avoidant person may keep love behind a wall. They may show love through actions, but struggle with words. They may be loyal, but struggle with openness. They may want closeness, but retreat when closeness is offered. It also explains why they might struggle with apologies. Apologizing means admitting fault, which must feel like confirming that bad part of themselves.
Exactly. Apology requires admitting you caused hurt. For someone with a strong shame response, that admission can feel unbearable. It can feel like confirming that you are bad. Instead of apologizing, the person might argue, minimize, or withdraw. They might tell themselves the issue is not important. The partner may feel invalidated. The avoidant person may feel safer. Underneath, shame is running the show. If you can see shame, you can begin to change the pattern.
So how can someone begin to heal from this hidden shame? Healing begins by recognizing that shame is not the truth. It is a feeling with a history.
If you are shamed for needing things, you may still carry the belief that need is unacceptable. In reality, need is human. Everyone needs comfort sometimes. Everyone needs reassurance sometimes. Everyone wants to be seen. When you begin to accept that, shame loses some of its power. You can start to treat your own vulnerability with respect rather than contempt. This healing often requires self-compassion, but not the kind that feels like empty positive talk. It is more like a steady inner stance that says, "Of course this is hard for me." If you have spent your whole life avoiding emotional exposure, it makes sense that exposure feels scary. If you are not taught emotional language, it makes sense that you struggle to find words. Shame tries to make you believe that struggle means you are defective. Self-compassion reminds you that struggle means you are human and learning.
That's a very kind way to approach it. And what about when a partner might unintentionally trigger this shame?
Partners can definitely trigger shame without meaning to. If a partner presses for vulnerability, uses criticism, or expresses frustration, it can intensify an avoided person's shame, even if the partner's needs are valid. This is why the path forward often includes learning to communicate without shaming each other. Avoidant people often need invitations rather than demands. Anxious partners often need reassurance rather than distance. When both people can see shame as part of the dynamic, it becomes easier to create safety. Shame has a hidden role because it makes vulnerability feel dangerous, pushing the person toward control and distance.
Let's move on to how anger and withdrawal act as shields. For someone who appears calm and steady, it must be confusing when these strong reactions come out. What's happening there?
Many dismissive avoidants don't see themselves as afraid. They see themselves as practical and composed. But when closeness starts to feel emotionally risky, a protective response can kick in very fast. For many avoidant people, that protection takes the form of anger or withdrawal. These responses can look harsh from the outside, and they can feel confusing from the inside. Understanding them as shields doesn't excuse hurtful behavior, but it explains why these reactions are so common and why they can feel so automatic.
So anger isn't just anger, it's a tool.
Yes, anger is a shield because it creates distance. When you feel anger, you often feel more powerful. You feel less vulnerable. Anger can make you feel certain, even if deep down you're scared or hurt. For a dismissive avoidant person, anger is especially useful because it replaces softer emotions that feel unsafe. If sadness feels humiliating, anger feels dignified. If fear feels weak, anger feels strong. They might not even consciously choose anger. It just shows up because it's the emotion that feels tolerable. Withdrawal reduces exposure. If vulnerability feels dangerous, emotionally disappearing feels like safety. This can be physical, like leaving the room, or emotional, like becoming quiet, giving short answers, and avoiding eye contact. Withdrawal gives immediate relief because it restores control, lowers emotional intensity, and reduces the risk of showing need. The problem is, it often hurts the partner who feels abandoned or rejected.
So if a partner brings up a problem, the avoidant person feels pressure and might lash out or pull away?
Exactly. They might not be able to name what they're feeling, but they feel tension and a desire to escape. They might respond with anger, saying the partner's overreacting or starting drama, or they might withdraw, becoming quiet and distant. The partner feels hurt, the avoidant person feels relief. The shield is doing its job, reducing vulnerability.
So both actions achieve the same goal then, but in different ways.
Yes. Anger pushes the other person away by making the interaction unpleasant, while withdrawal pushes them away by making interaction impossible. Both prevent the avoidant person from having to stay present with feelings that feel too exposed. Both can prevent a deeper conversation that might lead to intimacy. In the moment, that prevention can feel like safety, but over time it creates disconnection.
Anger can also shield against shame, you said earlier. How does that connect?
If you feel shamed, you may feel small. Anger can make you feel bigger. If you grew up in an environment where vulnerability was mocked or criticized, shame can be a powerful trigger. A partner's request for closeness can activate shame, even if the partner is gentle. The avoidant person might suddenly feel as if they are failing, as if they are being asked to do something they cannot do. Instead of admitting that, anger may rise. Anger says, the problem is you, which protects the person from feeling the problem is me. It protects dignity even as it damages connection. And withdrawal shields against feeling trapped. Many dismissive avoidants are very sensitive to obligation. They may fear that emotional conversations will lead to demands they cannot meet, or that once they start talking, they will not be allowed to stop. If they grew up in a home where emotional exchanges felt controlling, withdrawal becomes a way to protect autonomy. They leave the conversation to regain a sense of freedom. The partner may interpret this as avoidance. The avoidant person experiences it as survival.
So sometimes after a really close moment like intimacy, they might pull away or get irritated.
Yes. A deeply connected moment can activate fear of being needed. Then anger or withdrawal shows up to restore distance. This can be confusing for a partner because intimacy usually brings people closer, not farther apart. For the avoidant person, intimacy can activate fear of being needed, and the shield quickly quiets that fear by creating space.
It sounds like these behaviors are deeply learned from childhood.
They are. In some families, anger is the only emotion allowed. Sadness is mocked, fear is dismissed, need is shamed. But anger might be respected because it looks strong, so a child learns to translate softer feelings into anger. In other families, withdrawal is rewarded, so the child learns that staying quiet avoids conflict. These childhood strategies appear in adult relationships when they feel emotionally threatened.
And when a partner is in pain, like crying, it must be incredibly difficult for them to respond.
They might feel totally overwhelmed, not knowing what to do. Their own vulnerability gets triggered because tears invite closeness, tenderness, and comfort, which are unfamiliar experiences. Feeling trapped, they might get angry, saying the partner's being dramatic, or they might just leave. The partner feels abandoned. The avoidant person feels relief. But deep down, the avoidant person may feel helpless and ashamed, and anger or withdrawal protects them from those feelings.
So these shields aren't usually a conscious choice to be hurtful.
No, most of the time, these shields are automatic protections. The avoidant person might not even know what they're protecting against. They might truly believe the partner is the problem, or the conversation is truly pointless, or the relationship is truly too much. The shield feels like clarity to them. The work of healing is learning to recognize when the shield is active so they can slow down and figure out what's underneath.
How can someone start to do that? One common sign is the speed of the reaction. If anger suddenly rises, it often means something softer was touched. If withdrawal happens instantly, it often means they felt exposed. Recognizing this isn't about blaming themselves, but about curiosity. They can ask themselves, what did I just feel a moment ago? Or what felt threatened? The specific fear might vary: fear of being judged, fear of being obligated, fear of losing autonomy, but the pattern is often the same.
And how do they heal from this? What's the alternative? Healing means learning new ways to create safety. Instead of anger, they can learn to name that they're overwhelmed. Instead of completely withdrawing, they can learn to take a break while still promising to connect later. A dismissive avoidant might say, "I'm getting flooded, I need 10 minutes, and I want to come back." This protects their need for space without abandoning the partner. It also lessens shame because it frames the problem as emotional overload, not the partner being wrong. This kind of communication feels awkward at first, but it is often deeply relieving for everyone.
That's a very practical step. Now, let's explore something that seems almost contradictory: the deep craving for closeness that often exists within a dismissive avoidant person, even when they rarely show it. This sounds very confusing.
It is confusing, and it's one of the most painful parts. From the outside, a dismissive avoidant can look completely self-contained and unbothered. They might even say they do not need much. Still, many carry a quiet longing to be understood, to be chosen, and to feel emotionally held. The craving is real. The difficulty is that the same experiences that created the longing also taught the person to fear it.
So they want closeness, but are terrified of it at the same time?
Precisely. Closeness is a human need, not a weakness. People are wired to want connection because connection makes life livable.
When you share your inner world with someone and they respond with care, something inside you relaxes. You feel less alone. Even people who value independence long for that soft landing. The dismissive avoidant person often longs for it too, but the longing can feel dangerous to admit because it implies dependency.
And this craving also stems from early experiences, right?
Yes. Many learned early that closeness was complicated. Their caregivers might have provided for physical needs, but weren't there emotionally. They may have learned that feelings created discomfort in adults, or that needing things led to being pushed away. In that environment, the child still craves closeness, but the child also learns to stop reaching for it. The craving does not disappear, it simply moves underground, where it becomes harder to name and harder to satisfy.
This leads to a specific kind of loneliness then, even if they're surrounded by people.
It's a loneliness that doesn't always look like loneliness. They might have friends, coworkers, and even a partner. They may enjoy company and still feel that there's a private room inside them that nobody enters. They may not talk about this loneliness because talking about it feels like need, and need feels unsafe. So they keep living as if they're fine while quietly craving something deeper.
So in a relationship that seems fine on paper, they might feel restless or like something's missing, but they can't quite put their finger on it.
That's a very common situation. They might say they feel bored. They might say something is missing. They might start focusing on their partner's flaws. The partner may feel confused because nothing obviously is wrong. Underneath, the avoidant person may be craving deeper closeness, but the craving feels unfamiliar and threatening. Instead of moving toward it, they move away from it because moving away feels safer.
But the craving can break through their defenses sometimes.
Yes, in unexpected moments. The avoidant person might feel unexpectedly moved by their partner's kindness or softened by tenderness, or feel warmth when their partner simply sits with them without asking anything. These moments can feel like relief, like water in a dry place. Then later, the person may feel embarrassed or unsettled by how much the moment mattered. They might withdraw to regain control. This push and pull reflects the conflict between craving and fear.
And they might long to be understood without having to explain anything.
Yes, because many struggle with emotional language. They may not know how to describe what they feel. They may also fear that if they try, they will be judged or misunderstood. So they long for a partner who can sense what they need without them having to say it. This longing is tender and understandable. The problem is that adult relationships usually require some form of communication. When the avoidant person cannot communicate the need, they may feel disappointed that the partner does not provide it. They may then tell themselves closeness is not worth the trouble, which is another way of protecting against vulnerability.
So if they're stressed and want comfort but don't ask, and their partner tries to help but gets shut down,
They end up feeling more alone. Precisely. They might say nothing, the partner backs off, and then the avoidant person feels alone and the craving becomes sharper. Instead of recognizing the pattern, the avoidant person might tell themselves their partner is not supportive. The partner might tell themselves the avoidant person does not want closeness. Both are missing the hidden craving underneath the defensive behavior.
they also crave closeness in a very specific way, you say. Not intense or consuming.
That's right. Many want calm closeness, connection that feels like companionship, steadiness, and shared life. They often do not want closeness that feels intense, emotional, or consuming. They may feel overwhelmed by big displays of emotion or pressured by frequent reassurance requests. This does not mean they want no intimacy. It means they want a kind of intimacy that respects their nervous system and their need for space. When they cannot articulate that, relationships can swing between extreme distance and too much intensity.
And craving can show up as nostalgia, looking back at easier times?
Yes, they might think about an earlier relationship or an early stage of a relationship and feel a longing for how it felt. They might remember a time when closeness felt easy. They might not recognize that early closeness often feels easier because expectations are lower. As the relationship deepens, the avoidant person's fear rises, and they mistake that fear for incompatibility. The craving for closeness remains, but it is tied to a version of closeness that felt safer because it did not require deep vulnerability.
And it's also why they might seem fine after a breakup, but grieve later.
Many do feel relief after a breakup, and sometimes they truly feel relief. Still, many experience grief later when the relationship is no longer there and the defenses relax. They may feel waves of sadness that surprise them. They may miss the person more than they expected. The craving for closeness becomes clearer when the opportunity for closeness is gone, because the fear of closeness is no longer triggered. This can lead to regret, confusion, and a sense that they do not understand their own heart.
So, how can this deep craving be healed? Healing involves honoring the craving without obeying the fear. This begins with admitting to yourself that you want closeness. Many dismissive avoidants have trained themselves not to want it, because wanting feels risky. When you can gently admit the longing, you can begin to look at what kind of closeness actually feels safe for you. You can start to recognize that you do not have to choose between independence and intimacy. You can create a relationship where space is respected and closeness is steady, not overwhelming.
Now, let's talk about denial. The book explains how denial covers fear. Many people might see denial as simply lying or stubbornness, but it's different here, isn't it?
Yes. For dismissive avoidance, denial isn't usually a dramatic choice. It is a quiet survival move that helps them stay steady when something feels emotionally risky. Denial can sound like, "It is not a big deal," or "I do not care," or "I am fine." These phrases may even feel true in the moment, because denial can temporarily reduce fear by pushing it out of awareness. The problem is that what is pushed away still exists, and it often returns later in the form of distance, irritation, or sudden relationship decisions.
So it's a protective mechanism that starts early, much like the other patterns?
Exactly. Denial often begins in childhood, when a child learns that fear does not have a safe place to go. If a child expresses fear and is mocked or dismissed, the child learns that fear creates discomfort in others. If a child expresses fear and no one helps, the child learns that fear is a lonely experience. In either case, fear becomes something to hide. Over time, the child may learn to deny fear even to themselves. They become someone who is not afraid. That identity can feel powerful, but it can also make intimacy difficult, because intimacy asks you to admit what matters, and what matters is often tied to fear.
And denial often shows up as minimizing, making things seem smaller than they are.
Right. Minimizing is a form of denial where the person reduces the importance of a feeling or event. They might say a conflict does not matter. They might say a partner is overreacting. They might say their own hurt is not worth talking about. Denial can be comforting in the short term because it lowers emotional intensity. If you tell yourself something does not matter, you do not have to deal with the fear that it matters a lot. The fear might be that you could be rejected, that you could be abandoned, or that you could be controlled. Denial keeps those fears at bay.
So if a partner says, "I feel distant from you," and the avoidant person responds, "Everything is fine," they might actually believe it in that moment because of denial?
Yes, they might truly want everything to be fine. They might also feel fear that the conversation will turn into a demand for vulnerability. Denial helps them avoid that fear. The partner may feel invalidated and press harder. The avoidant person then feels more pressure and may withdraw. The denial did not solve the problem, it simply postponed it while increasing distance.
And they might shift their attention to other things like work or hobbies to avoid facing fear?
Absolutely. When a relationship feels emotionally intense, they might focus on work, errands, exercise, or hobbies. Productivity becomes a way to avoid fear. If you are busy, you do not have to feel. If you are solving problems, you do not have to face vulnerability. This can be praised by society. Underneath, the productivity may be covering fear, especially fear of needing someone and not knowing how to ask for care.
Detachment is another form of denial where they analyze rather than feel.
That's it.
They might talk about their relationship as if they are analyzing it, focusing on logic, listing reasons why something will not work, or convincing themselves the other person is wrong for them. This detachment can be a form of denial because it keeps the person away from the vulnerable truth, which is often that they care deeply and are scared.
So when a relationship deepens, like talking about moving in together, they might suddenly become critical or restless.
Yes, they might say the relationship has problems or focus on incompatibilities. They might feel a strong urge to escape. These thoughts can feel like clarity to them, but they might not realize fear is underneath. The fear might be of being trapped, of losing autonomy, or of being relied on emotionally. Denial then transforms fear into judgment, saying the problem is the relationship, which is easier to tolerate than the problem is that I am scared.
And denial also protects against shame.
Many dismissive avoidants carry shame about needing. If they admit they are scared of closeness, they may feel weak. If they admit they are lonely, they may feel exposed. Denial keeps them from feeling that shame. They might tell themselves they do not need closeness. They might tell themselves they are better alone. They might tell themselves relationships are not worth it. These statements can reduce shame in the short term, but the long-term cost is isolation and the repeated loss of relationships that might have been meaningful.
And it creates a repeating cycle in relationships where the partner feels unseen and becomes more emotional, which in turn makes the avoidant person deny more strongly.
Yes, it's a painful cycle. The partner feels unseen and may become more emotional, and the avoidant person feels more overwhelmed and denies more strongly. The partner then feels rejected and may become angry or desperate. The avoidant person withdraws. Both people are trying to find safety. Denial is the avoidant person's safety strategy, but it can create the opposite of safety in the relationship. It can make the partner feel alone, which increases the intensity the avoidant person is trying to avoid.
And denial can also delay grief.
Many dismissive avoidants do not grieve losses right away. They may feel relief after a breakup because the pressure of closeness is gone. They may tell themselves they are fine. They may throw themselves into work or new activities. Later, when life is quieter, grief can rise unexpectedly. The person may feel sadness they cannot explain. They may miss the person more than they expected. Denial kept grief away until it could no longer be held down.
So how does someone begin to heal from denial?
Healing begins with recognizing denial as a protective move rather than as truth. That recognition can be difficult because denial often feels like clarity. It feels like certainty. The first step is simply to notice when you feel the urge to minimize, detach, or insist you do not care. You might ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? This question is not meant to interrogate you. It is meant to gently bring fear into awareness so it doesn't have to hide behind denial.
It sounds like a quiet act of courage to even ask that question.
It is. For example, a dismissive avoidant person might notice the thought, this is not a big deal, and pause. They recognize that the thought often appears when they feel vulnerable. They take a breath and admit to themselves that it does matter. They might not share everything at once, but simply allow the feeling to exist. This is the beginning of changing the pattern, because once you admit something matters, you can decide what to do with it instead of automatically withdrawing.
And it's about learning to tolerate fear without turning it into distance.
Exactly. Fear is not a sign that the relationship is wrong. Fear is often a sign that the relationship is important. When you care, you have something to lose. Dismissive avoidant people often deny fear because they want to be invulnerable. The goal is not to become fragile. The goal is to become honest. Honest fear can be communicated gently. It can be paired with boundaries. It can be held without panic. When fear is allowed into the room, denial becomes less necessary.
Let's explore the difference between emotional numbness and emotional control. On the outside, they might look similar, like someone who's just calm and steady. But the book explains they're very different. What's the key distinction?
The key is whether you're connected to your feelings.
Emotional control means you're aware of your feelings, even if you choose not to act on them right away. You might feel sad but still go to work, or feel angry but speak respectfully. The feelings are present, but you have space around them. This control usually comes from learning that feelings can be handled and soothed. It's flexible. It doesn't require shutting down.
And numbness is different.
Yes, numbness isn't choosing a response, it's losing access to the feeling itself, or only experiencing it as a distant, muted signal. It's an internal dimming, like being behind glass, watching life rather than fully living it. You might know something is sad, but not feel it in your body. Or you might feel irritation without knowing the softer emotion underneath. Numbness can protect from overwhelm, but it also cuts you off from joy, intimacy, and knowing yourself. So numbness often starts as a way to cope with overwhelming feelings from childhood.
Precisely. If a child repeatedly experiences that emotions are not met with comfort, emotions can start to feel pointless. If sadness doesn't bring soothing, it becomes unbearable loneliness. If fear doesn't bring reassurance, fear becomes something you have to swallow. If anger creates conflict that is not repaired, anger becomes dangerous. In that environment, the child's safest move can be to stop feeling as much as possible, turning feelings down to function without emotional support.
And this happens quietly, not as a conscious decision.
Right. The child doesn't decide, I will become numb. The child simply learns that showing feelings does not help. They learn to distract themselves. They learn to focus on tasks. They learn to become self-sufficient. Over time, the habit of not feeling becomes automatic. As an adult, the person may believe they're just not emotional. They may say they are fine, and they may mean it. The numbness can be so familiar that it feels like the natural state of being.
This can explain why someone might seem oddly calm after a painful event like a breakup.
Exactly. They might keep functioning, even feel relief, and people might admire them for being strong. But weeks or months later, the person might suddenly feel restless, irritable, or empty. They might have trouble sleeping or feel disconnected from life. The grief was not gone, it was delayed. Numbness held it down until it could not be held anymore.
And because emotional control is often praised, it makes numbness even harder to spot because it looks like strength.
That's a big part of it. A dismissive avoidant person may be rewarded for being the calm one in the room. They may be praised for not being dramatic. They may become the person who keeps everything together. This praise can reinforce numbness because it treats emotional absence as maturity. The person may then fear that if they start feeling more, they will lose their identity or become overwhelmed or needy. But feeling more does not mean losing control. It often means becoming more alive.
How does numbness affect relationships specifically?
Intimacy needs emotional presence. A partner wants to feel that you are with them, not only physically, but emotionally. When someone is numb, they may be present in the room, but absent in the bond. They might listen and respond with logic, but without the warmth that communicates emotional engagement. The partner may feel lonely. The numb person may feel confused because they are trying. They might not understand what is missing. The missing piece is often emotional resonance. And resonance is hard to offer if you cannot feel what is happening inside you.
So if a partner shares sadness, the numb person might offer advice instead of comfort.
Precisely. They might offer practical help or suggest moving on. The partner feels unseen. The avoidant person feels frustrated because they offered what they know how to offer. Underneath, numbness may be limiting the avoidant person's access to empathy in the moment. They might care deeply, but they might not feel the partner's emotion in a way that guides a comforting response. This is not a lack of character. It is often a lack of emotional practice. It sounds like numbness can also make it hard for them to know themselves.
Yes. Emotional control lets you know your needs and make choices. Numbness can make it hard to know what you want, what you need, and what you value. If you cannot feel your own emotions clearly, decisions can become confusing. You might stay in a relationship that does not fit because you cannot feel the dissatisfaction. You might leave a relationship impulsively because numbness suddenly breaks into irritation. Without emotional connection to yourself, you can lose a sense of direction.
And numbness can even be mistaken for peace.
Some dismissive avoidant adults believe that being calm means they are emotionally healthy. Calm can be healthy, but peace feels settled and warm, while numbness feels blank and distant. Peace allows closeness, numbness often avoids it. If you notice that you feel calm only when you are alone and tense when someone wants closeness, that might not be peace, it might be numbness protecting you from vulnerability.
So how does someone heal from this numbness? Healing involves building the ability to feel without being overwhelmed. For dismissive avoidant people, this can be scary because they associate feeling with chaos. The goal is not to become flooded by emotion, but to become more connected to the smaller feelings that appear before things become intense. When you can notice small signals, you can respond earlier. You can ask for space before you shut down. You can ask for comfort before you become irritable. You can express a boundary before resentment builds. And this often starts with the body itself. Many numb people notice physical sensations before they notice emotions. You might notice tight shoulders, a heavy chest, or restlessness. Those sensations can be the doorway back to feeling. You can learn to pause and ask what the sensation might be connected to, and to stay with the feeling for a short time without fixing it, analyzing it, or pushing it away. This gentle practice teaches your system that feeling is survivable.
It sounds like a way to slowly bring feeling back to life. Now, let's talk about the quiet cost of living defended. This sounds very profound. What does it mean?
The quiet cost is what happens when you spend years protecting yourself from vulnerability. Dismissive avoidant attachment is often built around defense, not aggressive defense, but guarding your inner world. You learn to stay in control, rely only on yourself, and keep feelings contained. These moves can help you function, even succeed, and appear fine, but they also create losses that are easy to ignore until they become too heavy. It's quiet because you can build a life and seem okay, but something inside slowly grows tired of being alone. So the defense offers relief, but it's not the same as fulfillment. Exactly. When you pull back from an emotional conversation, you feel calmer. When you keep needs private, you avoid disappointment. When you stay independent, you avoid the risk of being controlled. These are real short-term benefits, but relief is the absence of discomfort, not the presence of emotional nourishment. Many dismissive avoidants are skilled at relief, but deprived of fulfillment. And that imbalance shapes their whole life.
And this leads to loneliness that doesn't necessarily look like loneliness.
Right, they might have many friends and relationships, but still feel that no one truly knows them because they do not let anyone in. They might share stories and opinions, but keep their tender feelings hidden. They might be liked and respected, but still feel unseen. This is the loneliness of emotional distance, hard to name because it is woven into what feels normal.
And it erodes intimacy over time?
Intimacy is about being emotionally close, feeling safe enough to be honest. When you live defended, intimacy feels risky, so you keep relationships in a safer zone. You might enjoy shared activities, but avoid deeper emotional engagement. This can feel fine initially, but over time, many people feel something is missing. The relationship may feel functional, but not nourishing. The avoidant person might feel bored or restless, not realizing that restlessness is grief for the closeness they have not allowed.
So if a partner says they feel lonely, the avoidant person feels irritated because they're protecting themselves from shame or from the vulnerability of admitting they want closeness too.
Yes. That irritation is a shield. They might think their partner is never satisfied or too emotional, but underneath, they're protecting themselves from the shame of feeling inadequate or the vulnerability of admitting their own desire for closeness. Living defended turns closeness into a problem, so they stay in irritation instead of stepping into tenderness.
And there's a loss of emotional range, so life feels flat.
When you spend years turning down feelings, you do not only turn down pain, you often turn down joy as well. Life can start to feel flat. Enjoyment is muted, pride in achievements does not reach the heart, affection is not expressed. The defended life can be efficient and orderly, but emotionally thin. Some people describe this as numbness, others just say they are fine. Either way, the cost is not fully experiencing your own life.
It must take a lot of effort to maintain this constant self-management.
It does. Living defended requires constant effort. You have to monitor what you share, stay composed, keep needs contained, and manage others' expectations so you do not feel trapped. This effort can be invisible even to you because it has been happening for so long, but it leads to fatigue. It can make relationships feel draining because emotional presence feels like work when you are defended. The avoidant person might then avoid relationships not because they do not want love, but because love feels exhausting.
So if a partner wants to talk after a conflict, they might feel instantly tired?
Yes, they might say they do not have the energy or prefer to just move on. That tiredness is real. It can be the tiredness of defense. When you have spent years protecting yourself from emotion, emotional conversations feel like heavy lifting. The avoidant person may not realize that the heaviness comes partly from not having practice. The more you avoid emotional engagement, the heavier it feels when it arrives.
And repair after conflict must be difficult too, because it requires vulnerability.
It is very hard. Repair means returning after hurt, apologizing, listening, and reconnecting. This requires admitting you care enough about the relationship to address pain, and admitting you may have contributed to the hurt. If shame is strong, repair can feel humiliating. If control is strong, it can feel like surrender. So the avoidant person may avoid repair by withdrawing, minimizing, or acting as if nothing happened. The partner may carry the hurt alone, and over time, unspoken pain creates distance.
It also shapes their sense of self, this defended life.
If you only show the competent, composed version of yourself, you may start to believe that version is all you are allowed to be. You may lose contact with your softer parts. You may not know what you want beyond achievement, or what truly connects you deeply. The defended life can become narrow, not because you lack depth, but because you have not allowed yourself to live from your depth.
And this can cause misunderstandings with loved ones who might see their distance as a lack of care.
Yes. Partners and friends may interpret your distance as lack of care, or believe you do not value the relationship, and they may feel rejected. You may feel misunderstood because you might care deeply. You may feel that your loyalty, your presence, and your practical support should be enough. The problem is that emotional distance blocks the signals that help other people feel loved. This mismatch can create conflict that feels unfair to both sides. The partner feels deprived, the avoidant person feels judged, and both feel alone.
So when a partner says, "I want to feel closer," the avoidant person hears, "You are failing."
Exactly. And then they withdraw. The partner hears that withdrawal as, "You do not matter." Both interpretations intensify pain. Living defended makes it harder to translate needs into connection because defense turns every request into a threat. When you begin to lower defenses, requests can become invitations instead.
And they miss out on everyday moments of comfort too?
Comfort is not only something you receive when you are falling apart. It is also the everyday experience of being held emotionally in small ways. It is sitting with someone after a long day and feeling understood without having to explain everything. It is being able to say you are tired and hearing kindness in response. When you live defended, you miss those moments because you do not let them in. You may not ask. You may not receive. You may not believe comfort is available until you experience it and realize how good it feels.
So healing isn't about throwing all defenses away then?
No, defenses formed for a reason. They protected you. The goal is to make them flexible. You can learn to notice when defense is helpful, such as setting a boundary in an unhealthy relationship. You can also learn to notice when defense is costing you intimacy in a healthy relationship. Flexibility creates freedom. When you can choose whether to open or close, you are no longer living automatically.
What's a practical step towards healing this quiet cost?
Learning to stay present a little longer. When you feel the urge to withdraw, you pause and take a breath. You name to yourself that you are feeling overwhelmed. You might share that with your partner in a simple way, asking for a short break and committing to return. These actions protect you while also building trust. They show that you can have space without disappearing. Over time, this reduces the need for heavy defense because the relationship begins to feel safer.
Theodore, this has been such a clear and empathetic explanation of a really complex topic. Thank you for walking us through these hidden feelings and behaviors. It really highlights how much impact our early experiences have on our adult relationships. It's all about understanding, Miles. When we understand why these patterns exist, we can approach them with more compassion, both for ourselves and for others. Absolutely, and understanding is truly the first step toward change. We've been discussing the dismissive avoidant attachment style today, drawing heavily from Mindy Rivers' insightful book, Understanding the Dismissive Avoidant Attachment Style. Her work provides a crucial roadmap for anyone looking to navigate these waters with more grace and connection. If you found this conversation helpful, consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from hearing it.